Right, let's now turn our attention to a really important development that happened this week, which was the Supreme Court verdict, which came out on December the 11th on the Union government's 2019 move to add Article 3 of the Constitution. Now, just to recap, in case you've forgotten that, what did they say in 2019? The abrogation ended the special status conferred first by the state of Jammu and Kashmir. The centre then also moved to reorganize Jammu and Kashmir into two union territories, Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh, and left open the possibility that at some point Jammu and Kashmir could become a state once again. But what did the Supreme Court rule this week? Well, the court essentially said that the constitutional order that revoked Article 370 was valid. A five-judge constitutional bench of the Supreme Court, presided over by the Chief Justice of India, D.Y. Chandrachud, had reserved its verdict on as many as 23 petitions on the matter on September the 5th. But essentially, there were three judgments, but they were fairly unanimous on the net outcome. And they said Jammu and Kashmir had no internal sovereignty after accession to India. There was no prima facie case that the president's orders in 2019 were in bad faith or were an extraneous exercise of power. And the Supreme Court also went on to say that Article 370 was essentially just a temporary provision. What did, however, that the reorganization of the erstwhile state into union territories was a temporary move, and therefore it did direct the centre for the restoration of Jammu and Kashmir statehood at some point and for legislative assembly elections to be held by September 2024. And there were other suggestions made. Justice S.K. Kaul, for example, recommending the setting up of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to try and heal wounds in Jammu and Kashmir, and also talking about the human rights situation in Jammu and Kashmir. And also he did talk about the Pandit exodus from Kashmir in 89 and 90. So that essentially is what the Supreme Court said. In India, I think it was around expected lines, not too much reaction to it. In Jammu and Kashmir or in other parts of the country, it was all fairly quiet. So what we're going to discuss on this episode of India Story is really what the international dimension of that has been, what the international reaction has been, because very interestingly, there's been next to no international reaction. Of course, Pakistan did make a bit of a noise about it, but you would expect that. And China, the other usual suspect, made a little bit of a noise about that, but you would expect it. But we haven't heard too much from the rest of the world. Why? And what does that mean for the international dimensions of Jammu and Kashmir? Well, let's now try and take a slightly broader, more strategic view of what the developments mean. Article 370 clearly is history. What does this mean for what happens in Kashmir going forward? And also, what has been the international reaction and the international repercussion? Should we now assume that when it comes to Jammu and Kashmir, other than Pakistan maybe making a few noises here and there, it's pretty much a settled issue now. For more on some of those issues, great pleasure to be joined by Professor Rajamohan, one of the country's top strategic thinkers, columnist at the Indian Express. Raja, thank you so much for being with us. I think over the decades spent so much time discussing Kashmir and the international repercussions and the rest of it. Pretty much now the Supreme Court has come out and said, look, there was no internal sovereignty after 1947. The question is over. Article 370 is gone. Jammu and Kashmir is an integral part of the country. Yes, you'll have to have elections at some point. The world seems to have pretty much gone along with that, right? Or is there any dissenting notes you've heard from outside other than Pakistan?
No, both Pakistan and China in different ways. Of course, Pakistan, the foreign minister himself held a conference, basically, trashing the judgment. And it's quite amusing to hear from him to say Indian courts have become political in a country where the judiciary has long been the handmaiden of the army. But nevertheless, the Pakistanis made it quite clear they're not going to accept it. Even more interesting is the fact that Pakistanis always used to dismiss Article 370 as a joke, saying that, look, this is all, India's, optics and really there's no substance. So, but the moment since last August 2019, they've taken this, oh my God, why is India dropping this? So in many ways, for them, There are multiple contradictions in their position, but nevertheless, they did react predictably. The second reaction is from China. China made it quite clear that they will not accept Ladakh conversion as a union territory, and at the western border, this is exactly what their spokesman said, not the minister, saying that this belongs to China. So the two disputants to the territory, after all, we've had both of them always, Pakistan and China. Both of them have taken predictable negative reactions. Then I think it looks
just to understand that a little further. Look,
yeah.
Let's face it, when Jammu and Kashmir, the issue first flared up, and it went to the United Nations, for example, 1947, 1948, wasn't just China and Pakistan who used to make noises about Jammu and Kashmir. It was also the West, it was America, it was Britain, it was a number of other countries would come in and saying, oh, this issue has to be used. America has used that issue to put pressure on India for a long period of time. The rest of the world now, when it comes to Jammu and Kashmir, are they pretty much on board with the basic principle it's an integral part of India and that's it? There may be questions and arguments about, oh, you have to have elections and human rights and blah, and blah, but by and large, it's a now settled principle that, okay, it's an integral part of India, accepted in the rest of the world with the solitary exceptions of Pakistan and China right now. And we'll come to those later.
Yeah, not so fast, Vikram. I mean, you had the Pakistanis and Turks, I'm sure, obviously got the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, to issue a statement that again was predictable because Pakistan has always sought to use the OIC to make statements on Kashmir, and I think that too they got done. I think the rest of the world, they will go by what is practical. I mean, just because our Supreme Court has decided Kashmir is an integral part of India, they're not going to automatically take that position because historically, if there is a problem between two countries, they're not going to simply say, look, this is really, we're going to tilt to one side. Barring a handful of very close friends of India, I mean, nobody else says it's, that there's no dispute, that there is a dispute between India and Pakistan. Even to some extent, India itself, when it's willing to negotiate with Pakistan, says there is a problem. So I think that problem is not going to disappear. I mean, that problem will disappear only when the rest of the world sees there's not much happening in Kashmir. There is no unrest. There is no insurgency. There is no that there is peace and prosperity in Kashmir. Then people will get used to that new situation. But if tomorrow there's a fresh insurgency, there are more conflicts within and around Kashmir, the rest of the world will say, look, you guys sit down, sort it out, which is what the current US position is. We can talk in detail, for example.
So specifically what the Supreme Court has also said, that have elections by September 2024. The fact that, the statehood is restored and elections are held and it's seen to be representative and free and fair elections, would that again be an important step in taking this forward with the rest of the world?
No, absolutely. There's no question. I think the key is, one is the legality, right? Each country is the question of sovereignty, how it is defined, etc. The second is the politics of it. Finally, a state's sovereignty is reflected in its effective governance of the territory. And the problem that we've had in Kashmir in different ways has been the sense that that political compact between Indian state and the Kashmiri people was in a crisis. So constructing that compact, a political compact, which is critical for the rest of the world to see that, look, there is no problem here, things are going well, and if other countries start coming, investing here, then automatically the issue gets off the table. But I think for India, we need to get that political compact right of making sure the Kashmiris feel they're part of this country and that they have no reason to create, all kinds of issues for themselves and for the rest of the country.
All right. Let's now turn to Pakistan and China. Now, when it comes to Pakistan's position when it comes to being able to influence anything in whether it's in India or in Jammu and Kashmir or the rest of the world is sharply diminished. Pakistan itself has become a much weaker state. The economy is in a mess. They're domestically in a mess. They're not really having the capacity to even keep the insurgency running the terrorism running in Kashmir like they once could. So is there that perhaps realization in Pakistan that we don't really have the ability to keep this on the boil to the extent that we once, or to the same extent that we once used to?
I think the problem for Pakistan is this: having thrown so much, good money at it for so long that the capacity to walk back from a declared position is very hard. For example, we came very close. If you remember, you covered Musharraf-Manmohan Singh period. You had back channel negotiations. We had more recently, again, there were conversations between the two sides. The idea that you can settle as is where is basis, that idea has always run through the bilateral discourse. But the politics of Pakistan, at this point at least, just seem, it is difficult for them, I think, their political class to accept it, nor the political class has the courage to say, look, time has come to make a new beginning. I don't know if you saw last few days, Nawaz Sharif, who's just come back to Pakistan after a long exile, said, look, Pakistan should have good relations with its neighbors, with India, with Afghanistan. But the logic of that means at least taking the Kashmir issue off the table, stopping terrorism across the border. Now, implications of what he's saying is clear, but does he have the capacity to actually implement that is the question. And I think this is where the temptation to internationalize will be there. We saw in 2019 when Pakistan went crazy with the help of China, tried to draw the Security Council into it. Luckily for us, the French and the Americans helped us a lot. So this time, of course, there is no such effort, which clearly reflects what you said. Pakistan is much weaker today.
Yeah,
it's really in a bad position. To the ability, I think India's improved relations with the US, as well as India's improved relationship with the Gulf countries, have actually removed some of the external props for Pakistan's Kashmir policy. So I would say beyond China and Turkey, I don't see much external support for it. But I think that's why it's important for us to consolidate, to move forward within Kashmir.
So let's set Turkey aside for a minute. China, of course, is, as with everything when it comes to India or Indian foreign policy, China is, of course, the dragon in the room, if you like. So China, would it like to turn the heat up on this, or is it just another one of those things that China will keep on doing to keep India off edge, the provocations that keep happening? So do it as low-level harassment of India as opposed to trying to really up.
See, of course, the difference between China and Pakistan, Chinese state is a more classical type of state. They're not doing jihadi stuff in India. But they see clearly, they apply military pressure, which is more classical forms of coercion. The Chinese, I think, quite just as the balance of power between India and Pakistan has changed in favor of India, the balance of power between India and China is today tilted towards China. China is much bigger. They're much stronger military, they're much stronger defense production. And that is the result of this change in the balance of power that we've seen the Chinese try and nibble at our territory. You remember there have been at least 4 major crises in the last decade, 2013, 2014, 2017, 2020. So as China builds up its military capability on the border, they are mounting relentless pressure on India. And today, if after Galwan, today we have 60,000 troops at 17,000 feet. They're enduring a 4th winter. So the pressure is already on us to be able to defend not just in Ladakh, which is part of Kashmir, but all across the 3,500 kilometer border, where there are multiple points at which China can take the initiative. So China's challenge will remain in both militarily, diplomatically, because China also uses Pakistan.
All right.
That their advantage is they can keep using Pakistan to do nasty stuff on this side while they keep up the military pressure on the other side.
All right, Raja, we'll have to see how it all pans out, but interesting developments, and also actually interesting to see that there's been relative silence in most of the world, which means seems to be heading in a particular direction. Thank you so much for joining us on the international repercussions and international implications of that Supreme Court verdict on Article 370. Thanks so much for talking to us.